the next character, Jael. Here she comes. From what I was reading about this encounter is that Jael would have been standing outside of her tent, possibly waiting to hear news of the battle, to hear what's happening. Or she could have been waiting for an Israelite soldier who needed help coming in her direction. Either way, what we're seeing here is the character of Jael. She's kind, she's pure, and we see that what she is about to do in this story has to be from God because she does not harbor evil or any bad will towards anyone. She's actually going out of her way to show kindness and to help someone else. But instead, she sees the enemy. She sees Sisera running towards her tent. And I'm pretty sure this happened quickly. He wasn't running towards her and asking politely if he could come into her tent. I would imagine that he's running towards her and it's all happening really fast and he's almost intruding upon her. Nonetheless, we see that she invites him in. So let's read Verse 18, and Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, do not be afraid." So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. This covered would imply that he is afraid. So he's running in. You can tell he has no army, he has no chariot, he's stripped of every confidence and security that he has. And so he's running into her tent and he finds himself a rug or a covering because he's afraid. Verse 19, and he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. Now here's the word covered again, and this would imply that he might be cold. We might be wondering, why is this important? Well, the first one, he's afraid. He's coming in, he's intruding upon her and her tent, and he's covering up, and she's allowing this to happen. And the second one is showing that he has some physical needs. He's thirsty, he's tired, and he's probably cold. How do we know he's cold? And why would he be asking for a nice comfy blanket? Because we know from before, if Josephus was right and there was a hailstorm, there isn't a hailstorm unless the weather is a little chilly. And so we see here that he has a need, a physical need. Those needs are thirst and warmth. And she is willing to meet those needs for Sisera. And God begins to put on her heart a divine plan. Verse 20 says, and he said to her, "Stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say no." We notice that he asks for something to drink, and she gives it to him. He asks for something to cover up with because he's cold. She gives it to him. But what he asks her to do next, she does not do. And the first word of verse 21 says, "but." That word "but" would imply that Jael does not agree to what he's asking her to do. She respects God, she honors God, she obeys God, and she knows that to lie would go against God. The house of Heber is still religious and faithful to God, and she will not sin before God, even in the form of a small lie. I want to have that kind of conviction that when dealing with people or circumstances, that I have the mind and the attitude of Christ so much that when something feels off, when something feels wrong, when something feels like it's going against God, even in the smallest thing, that I have the conviction in my heart to say, I can't do that. That's not right. Her obedience to the Lord takes over. So let's see what she does. Verse 21, but Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand, and then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. So he died. When he asks her to lie, this is the moment, I believe, when God stirred something in her heart. Because as much as her heart was good and wanted to help, when he asked her to lie, she realized that this man was asking her to do something that was going to go against what she knew was right. And so she can't do it. She had to carry out this divine plan that is stirring in her heart at the moment. We see right here, again, God using someone who is willing to use what they have in their hand right now. He wasn't looking for any fancy weapon. He wasn't looking for a big army. He used Jael, who was willing to use a tent peg. Jael sees him falling asleep. He's had his couple glasses of milk. He's got his comfy blanket. He is heading off to Sleepy Town. And she stays quiet enough to let him fall asleep. And then she takes a tent peg and a hammer. And I'd like to point out that this is her own tent. If she is the wife of Heber, most likely he had other wives. She might be one of his more favored wives because she has her own tent. These are simple people. They don't have servants. She has her stuff that she's responsible for. And if they are more nomadic in nature, they're used to tearing down and setting up their tents and kind of moving around. So she knows how to use a hammer and a tent peg. She knows exactly how hard to strike that tent peg with the hammer in order for it to go right down into the ground, probably with one hit. This isn't someone who is just looking around and sees a hammer and thinks, I should drive this nail through his head. I wonder how to do that. She knows how to do it. This is where we see God, again, using someone who is willing to use what they have in their hand right now. Sisera is asleep, and this shows us his foolishness to be alone with his enemy. Just like Eglon was alone with Ehud, he should have never been alone with Ehud. Ehud was stronger, he was smarter. We see that Eglon and Sisera both fall victim to foolishness, and this is what the world does to us. It makes us foolish. We start depending so much on these things that we've created for ourselves, and when those things are gone, what do we have? We have nothing. We have no protection. The world isn't going to protect us when we need safety. The world makes us foolish, and this is what we see with Sisera. And so while he's sleeping, she takes that hammer, drives it through the side of his head, all the way to the ground. Obviously, this wouldn't have been her plan from the beginning. She didn't wake up that morning thinking, I'm going to drive a nail through someone's head today. I don't know who it's going to be. We'll see who runs through my tent. I'm pretty sure she wasn't thinking that. And that just shows even more that this was a divine plan put on her heart and in her mind from the Holy Spirit. God continued to reveal opportunities to her as she was faithful, and she continued to obey. And like I mentioned in our last study, that's how we are supposed to do life. God reveals a little bit of his plan, and we listen and we obey. And when we do that, he reveals a little more, and then we follow in that direction. We don't want to get so frustrated that we don't know the plan, we don't know what's coming next, everything's unknown, everything's uncertain, and so now I'm going to question God and question his tactics, and I'm going to question why he's making it hard for me. Why am I going through this? God has a plan for us, and God reveals little by little. And so he reveals little by little. He asks us to obey. He asks us to trust him. He asks us to follow him. And then he reveals more. Well, I can also imagine possibly the conflict that Jael was having in her heart, because to her, when Sisera asks her to even lie for him, she says that she can't do it. She says that would be disobedient to God. And now she's going to murder him? Murder is a sin. So this can't be from God. It must be from the enemy. And so I can't do it. I can't go through with it. That would have been understandable for her. But something gave her peace. There was something calming about this crazy plan that she knew it wasn't from the enemy. She had a feeling that it was from God. And it's that peace that God gives. It's that clarity that we can know that even if this plan seems crazy, I feel peace about it. So I'm going to take the next step and see what happens. That's a good way to go about decisions in life. Look for that peace. Are we feeling uneasy about a certain decision that we have to make? If we're feeling so uneasy, that might not be the right decision. If we're feeling more peace about something over here, we might want to explore that. And I think that God is so faithful to know our hearts so well that if he sees that we're trying to follow and obey him, we have some peace, and so we're heading in this direction. And let's just say God is wanting us to go this way and we make the wrong choice. Does that mean game over? That's it? I don't think so. I think God reroutes us and he gets us back on the path, and then he reveals a little bit more to us. That's how good God is. And so we don't have to worry that we're going to make the wrong choice if we're truly seeking after him and we are truly wanting to obey. God gives clarity and he brings peace. It reminds me of Philippians, where it talks about that peace that transcends all understanding. That's how we have to make decisions. We have to go to God with all of our thoughts, with all of our choices, with all of ourselves, and say, which way am I going? And where we find that peace, explore that direction and see where it takes you. For Jael, this peace and this light and this clarity would have overridden any thoughts that she might have been having that this would have been from the enemy. Now she receives a supernatural power that enables her to do what she does here in verse 21. Now, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking of a few thoughts. I'm thinking, well, what if her hand was shaking? What if she hesitated too long and he wakes up right as she's lifting that hammer over his head? What if his men came bursting through her tent looking for him and they see her standing over him about to do what she's about to do? What if she missed? In any of those instances, she would pay tremendously for this. But because God was with her, God was behind her, God was guiding her, he gave her the courage, the strength, the guts, and a steady hand to carry out this crazy act. Quoting from a commentary that I read through this chapter, it says, Sisera thought to destroy Israel with many iron chariots, yet he himself is destroyed with one iron nail. Thus, the weak things of the world confound the mighty. Let's finish this up. Verse 22. And behold, as Barak was pursuing Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said to him, Come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking. So he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead with the tent peg in his temple. Remember on verse 9 when Barak was told by Deborah that the victory wasn't going to be his to claim, but it was going to be by the hand of a woman. Barak could have thought that this was Deborah. We see here it's Jael. And I would imagine that in this moment, as Barak is standing there looking at Sisera with the tent peg through his head and his head on the ground, and he's looking at Jael with some blood on her, and those words from Deborah that Sisera will be given over into the hand of a woman, he's looking at her right here. He's seeing the woman who Deborah told him about. And for a minute, his human side might have felt a little jealous, might have felt a little upset that it wasn't him. But again, he remembers these words from Deborah, and he is happy and he is pleased that it's coming true, just as Deborah said, because that means that it's coming true just as God said. So verse 23, so on that day, God subdued Jabin the king of Canaan before the people of Israel, and the hand of the people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Jabin the king of Canaan, until they destroyed Jabin king of Canaan. Do we notice how many times Jabin king of Canaan was mentioned here? 3 times in 2 verses. Israel is completely delivered out of the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan. And now Israel finally realizes that they cannot let their enemies go. They have to rid the land of their enemies, just as God had told them to do from the very beginning. They're finally getting there. They're finally seeing how important it is to get rid of the Canaanites. After this moment in Judges chapter 4, after we see Jabin, the king of Canaan, we actually never read about another king of Canaan oppressing the Israelite people. And so for the Israelites at this point, it might have taken them a long time to get there, but right now, at the end of chapter 4 for the Israelites, they're choosing to obey God, finally.